Good afternoon, everybody. This is Nauza. I'm delighted to introduce Neal Basson. He is a close an associate, plus he's the MD of a very successful Bid Perfect in a company. What he does is he's got 2 sessions. So I hope you've got it in your diary to be on not only today but for tomorrow. For next Monday as well, same time, same place. These 2 sessions will enable you to help you to master the art and science of bid writing, enable you to get bid ready, and please pay close attention. The webinars are also being recorded. You will have access to them a little later. So I'm going to hand over to Neal, who will take you through for the next hour or so. If you have any questions, use chat. I'm here to facilitate. But be aware there are 2 sessions. This is a foundation one, and the next one is an intermediate one. Same time, same place next week. Over to you, Neal.
Thank you for the introduction, Nawzar. I'm going to go straight to, we have a presentation, or I have a presentation for you today. So I'm going to go straight to the presentation and we'll get kicked off. We've only got an hour. It's just gone 2 o'clock now. So we need to expedite things pretty quickly. So just bear with me a second while I open up the presentation. Okay, so hopefully you can all see a nice picture of what Heathrow might look like. I'm sure many of you are living and working in the sort of local area. So I felt that was appropriate for today's meeting. As Nawzar has said, this is part 1 of Bidding to Win. Part 2 follows at the same time and in the same place virtually next week. Hopefully we'll get back to a semblance of normality soon, but for the time being we are delivering via Zoom. So this is me and the organisation I work for and help to run is Bid Perfect Limited. And the key thing, I guess, a couple of key things about myself and Bid Perfect, very quickly, is we're a bids and tenders consultancy. So that's all we do. We talk the talk in terms of training, which is what I'm doing today. And we walk the walk because we actually help our clients create their bids as well, which goes to their clients, and hopefully many of them win, which is always a good thing. My background is in selling, and that's a really important point. Because to write a bid, you have to adopt a sales mindset. We find many organisations and many people treat it as a kind of administrative exercise, and that is that probably means you're on the way to writing a losing bid and spending a lot of time and potentially money for no return. So we don't want to be on that side of the fence. So a couple of things about a couple of objectives about today and into next week, some broad objectives. The first one, to understand and appreciate what makes a winning bid. In line with the administrative exercise example that I've just mentioned, a lot of our clients, when they first meet with us, tend to think that, and sometimes just completing the document is enough to be successful, when that is not the case. Every sector these days is highly competitive, particularly at the moment as the economy starts to pick up again. So it's about writing a winning bid, not necessarily writing just a completed bid. There is a difference between the two. So I have to give you in a couple of hours an approach, a series of tools and tips and techniques, a methodology, if you like, that will improve your chances of success. As I've said, being on the winning side of the fence rather than the losing side of the fence. And just very quickly, the terminology, I will probably use the word bid for the majority of the time, but there are other words that mean the same thing. To tender is the same thing. Your proposal is the same thing. Your submission, the same applies, and response. And there are other words as well. So the terminology is unimportant. Essentially, it's a document that leaves your organisation, probably electronically these days, but designed to win a piece of work, designed to win a contract. That's the key thing. So I'd ask you just to take a brief moment. As I've said, we've only got limited time. And just consider the questions. Why is it that organisations, be they public sector or private sector, why do they go to tender? What are they broadly looking for when they're looking to select an organisation to work with? If you think about it, it takes your time and your money and your experience to write the tender document. but also it takes, from the client's perspective, it takes them time as well. So there must be something, there must be a series of reasons behind that. So hopefully you've been able to give that a bit of thought in those first few seconds. And the reason I ask you to give that consideration is, one, to build some background, which we're going to have a look at in a second. But two, if we can look at things from the perspective of the buyer, from the organisation that is issuing the invitation to tender, from the evaluator that's going to look through it and judge if they want to work with your company or not. That's a powerful way to do things. If you can put yourself in the shoes of another, we can create a more empathetic bid. And empathy is a powerful contributor to an overall winning bid process. So the first question we looked at, or I asked you to think about, was why go to tender, and what is it that the organisation looks for, and the individuals that are working on behalf of that organisation. Well, firstly, they want to be able to make a comparison, and that comparison has to be made on a level playing field. Certainly in the public sector, where everything is transparent, and if everyone is responding to the same document and looking at the same questions, then that process becomes objective rather than subjective. By asking what might be challenging questions and setting a series of challenging requirements in the tender, they are minimising the risk for things to go wrong, aren't they? They are minimising the risk to make the wrong choice when they select an organisation, a supplier, a partner to work with. They're also ensuring different areas of compliance. Now, if it's a public sector entity, such as the council here, there is a legal requirement. Over a certain amount of money, there's a legal requirement for a local authority to go out to tender. If it's in the private sector, there is no legal requirement, but certainly any organisation of repute would want to be seen to be running things in the best way. Certainly if they have if they're publicly quoted and have shareholders, for example, then those people and those shareholding organisations would want to make sure their business is being run properly. Tendering will be part of that. Now, we hear another argument that's lowest price always wins, and that is simply untrue. Price is certainly part of the equation. We're going to talk briefly about price, so we won't be talking about it in any level of detail. But if on the pricing, yes, it is price, but it's a sustainable price. So if it's a contract that might run for 3 years or 5 years, for example, it's not necessarily what they'll pay on day one, it's what they'll pay over the period of that time. That's, again, it's part of the evaluation process that they'll be looking for. Depending upon what you're selling, there's either a return on investment opportunity, or they will be wanting you to deliver value for money. So again, we're relating back to price. Yes, for every pound that they spend, what will they be getting in return from you? That's all part of the decision-making and the evaluation process. Pricing is important, as we've just said, but in what you're doing and what you're offering, how could you make their organisation more efficient? Because if you can make their organisation more efficient, there is a time-saving opportunity and there is a cost-saving opportunity there, which all comes into the financially based argument. If you can determine how you're going to make them more efficient, if you can measure and quantify those opportunities, even better. Some other factors that you might want to consider, again, to put yourself into the mind of the people that are actually making the decision. They'll be looking, and we've done our homework. We've spoken to many council evaluators, and we've also worked with an organisation called CIPS, CIPS, which is the professional body for procurement people. So the feedback that you're seeing here is not necessarily my feedback, it's feedback that's coming from people that are, as I've said, making the decisions. One of the things they're looking for is innovation. They're looking for someone that is able to think of new ways to do things, better ways to do things. And if that's the case, then there is an opportunity to drive higher value from the relationship that will be put in place. They'll want to understand at a very defined level, they'll want to understand your ability, your capability, your competence, your experience, your expertise to actually deliver the work in hand. And that's why any robust tendering process is going to ask some pretty searching questions of you, and you'll need to be in a position to answer those questions, which is what we're going to talk about. Maybe things are not going right. Maybe there's a contract in place at the moment and the provider is not doing what they said they would, or the communication process has broken down, or the relationship is not as communicative and collaborative as they'd like. That might be another reason for an organisation to come back out to the market to see who they could be working with that's going to offer a better standard of service. Similarly, they'll want to find a partner that fits them culturally. Yes, there are very many logical reasons why an organisation will select you or your business, but they'll also be looking for someone that they see they can work with, that has, for want of a better expression, there's a bit of a fit as far as the chemistry is concerned, and certainly the culture. And in doing your research, which we're going to talk about, that should come through in your proposal, in your bid. They'll want access to data. You could call it management information, I suppose. And the more current, the more available that data is, again, the better it potentially makes their organisation in terms of faster decision making, more accurate decision making. So management information about the contract involved is normally an important factor. They'll want you to look at things now, absolutely, if they're about to sign the contract. But if, as I've said, if that contract is going to run for a period of time, they'll want you to understand what's likely to happen in the future as well. For example, changes in policy, changes in legislation, what's around the corner. What do we know now that's not going to happen for a year or two's time? That is another factor to consider. They'll want to work with an organisation that shows certainly integrity, but is open in their communication style. And when things go wrong, and not everything is perfect, we all know that, but when things go wrong, are prepared to take responsibility and accountability to sort those issues out in a quick period of time, short period of time. They'll also similarly want to work with an organisation that's prepared to take things on that, again, are not necessarily going right, but fix them quickly. So a problem-solving ethic in that respect. And lastly, the people that are evaluating the tender and working and running the tender process are not necessarily the recipients of the service. They may have internal customers, either within the council or a commercial organisation. So again, it means that they will want to make the right decision. And that's another reason for running a tender process in the most robust fashion. So there are some considerations why people go to market, and some of the, at a generic level, some of the things that they are looking for. So if you can get your mind into the mind of the tendering organisation, that's a strong position in which to start, rather than just looking at things from your own perspective, which creates an element of a disconnect, if you like, within the bidding process between you and the potential client. So the first thing, or not the first thing, but the follow-up thing I'll talk about, excuse me while I take a sip. The follow-up thing I'm going to talk about are the basics. And the basics, you have to get the basics right. The basics, and I go back here to a point I made earlier on, are not enough to win, because we have to consider, you're a professional organisation and you want to do things properly, but we have to consider that our competitors will all achieve the basics, so we should too. And it's then how we build upon the basics, which creates the winning bid rather than the completed bid. But let's start at base one. First of all, there will be a supplier questionnaire. Within a tender document, there will be a supplier questionnaire. So it'll ask you for very basic information, like your company name, like your address, like your registered number if you have one. And then there will be more detail perhaps on what the organisation does, how long it's been established, that kind of thing. These are typically very basic information that you have to provide as answers, or yes, no, or, as I've said, simple, straightforward stuff. The thing is, you've got to tick all the boxes. If you don't tick all the boxes, you could be dismissed from the process. So, as I've said, the basics are essential. You've got to get them right. There could be a document, and there's no standard tendering process. Each organisation tends to adopt a slightly different approach, but there could be a document called a form of tender, and that is for you to sign and complete and return. And all it's confirming is that you've read the terms and conditions appropriate to this tendering exercise, and you agree with them. But again, if you don't sign, complete it and return it, you could be chucked out of the process. So it's an important factor. It's not a winning factor, but it is potentially a losing factor. There could be, again, a certificate that you need to sign and return, and that's called a non-collusion certificate. And this is just, by the way, this is public sector bidding rather than private sector bidding. But this would confirm to the council, as is per the current example, that you have not colluded in any way with other bidders that may well be bidding as part of this process. You will be asked probably to provide certain financial details, for example, a copy of your last 3 years of accounts. If you're a new business, you may well be asked for projections, but there's probably going to be a requirement for some kind of either accounts that have happened or accounts that will happen, you believe, in terms of projections. You'll be asked for references, typically 3 references of organisations that you've provided the same or similar services to. The important point here is to provide that information in the form required, but also the referees that you've given to notify those people and those organisations to let them know that they will be asked for a reference. And then I would follow up as well. Some weeks later, depending upon the timing of the tender, I would make contact with those referees to ask them if they've been requested and if they've completed and returned the necessary information. You may well be asked for certain policies. So in some cases, you'll have to submit them as part of the bid process. In other cases, again, it's a tick box. Yes, you have the policy, or no, you don't have the policy. Typically, for example, health and safety, disaster recovery, that kind of thing. So try and have your policies in order before you get stuck into the bidding process. It will save you time later in the day. And lastly, as I've mentioned, you will have to provide some pricing. So typically, again, in most public sector bids, there will be a template, normally Excel or perhaps a Word document that you will need to complete and return as part of your submission. So those, what are there, 7 factors are, as I've said, they're basic and they are essential, but we have to make the assumption that not only we are providing that information, but all of our competitors are providing that information. So if that's our start point, then the real writing begins, doesn't it? It's taking it from the completed bid to the winning bid, which is where we want to be. So I'm going to outline to you the principal elements of a winning bid, and throughout the rest of the session today and into the hour, same time, same place next week, we're going to cover all of these factors, okay? So don't be too concerned about the level of detail at the moment. We're going to get to it. First of all, at the core of a winning bid, as I've already described, the pricing needs to be the right price. Now, you have to determine what that right price is. You should know your market. You should know your competition. You should know what the client might be prepared to accept. And in some cases, they might tell you that as well. They might volunteer a budget or some financials up front, and it's up to you to adhere to those. You'll need to follow the golden rules of bidding. And I'm going to give you half a dozen golden rules, both again today and into the session next week. And then the principal elements revolve around this core of what makes the winning bid. The first one is that you have to directly answer the questions according to the criteria, the evaluation criteria, and we'll be covering all of these things, so don't concern yourself too much with the terminology, that the tendering organisation, the organisation that's issued the invitation to tender, has put forward. If you do not do that, then you will be on the way to writing a losing bid. And to re-emphasise, we don't want to waste our time. The next criteria, or the next element that we have to consider, is an understanding of what the broader picture is, what is important within the sector and the organisation that we are bidding to right now, and into the future, of course. We have to demonstrate that we can deliver what we're being asked to. We have to demonstrate what's called in bidding and in other factors in business, our solution. We also must outline what are the benefits to the client. So how does their organisation become better as a result of what we're doing? What are the positive outcomes for them? How might they, the example I mentioned earlier on, was how might we deliver an efficiency saving, for example. There are some other factors that we'll look at along those lines. We should make our proposition more believable, and the way we make it, we can write from a positive perspective. Again, we're going to talk about that next week, and we can write from a position of confidence, but we have to provide evidence. There are different types of evidence and different strengths of evidence that we can include in our bid to make our proposition more believable. And lastly, when we are writing, we should use a style that's easy to understand and easy to process. And if the document is written leanly, clearly, and precisely, then that's more likely to take place. That's a session for next week. Today, we're going to talk about the top 2 elements here: how to directly answer the questions according to the evaluation criteria, and how we can show, in general terms, an understanding of the broader objectives of the organisation concerned. So, we have plenty of time. It's only 20 past 2. Time flies when you're having fun, as they say. Right, the golden rules. I said I would give you half a dozen golden rules today and into next week. And the thing with the golden rules, there are, I think I saw earlier on, there are 20 participants in the meeting in this presentation right now. Now, some of you may well be doing the same thing as far as your business is concerned, but I expect, you know, there are certainly different organisations from different sectors. And the thing with the golden rules of bidding is it doesn't matter. What you see on the screen here are some representations of sectors in which we work. So defence, telecoms, catering, pharmaceuticals, and some very large companies we work with, and some much smaller organisations. If you stick to the golden rules, you are more likely to create a winning bid, regardless of the sector in which you work. They're universal. So you have obviously you know about your business, your company, you know about your sector, you know about your products and your services. My job in this presentation today and Monday next week is to give you, through the golden rules and the associated modules, the tools and tips and the techniques that mean you can take that knowledge that's in your head and in your systems perhaps and get that onto the page in the most convincing, compelling fashion. And that's what makes a winning bid compared to a completed bid. Just to again re-emphasize that point, because it's a really important one. So this is the first half of the most fundamental rule of bidding. And that first half of that rule, as you can see for yourselves, is excellent bids will usually win contracts. There's always the exception to the golden rule, isn't there? But in most cases, it's the excellent bid that's going to be successful. Now, we work and we live in a Newtonian universe. So a gentleman called about 400 and something years ago, a gentleman called Sir Isaac Newton postulated the laws of physics. And one of those laws is for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So have a think about that. You know what's coming. If excellent bids will usually win contracts, that means, of course, the equal and opposite reaction is poor bids will usually lose contracts. So it's kind of self-evident, isn't it? Yeah, I write a great bid, it's more likely to be successful. I write a poor bid, it's more likely to lose. Absolutely. But it's what's below the line. One of the services that I mentioned earlier on, that we're a bids and tenders consultancy, one of the services that we provide our clients is a review service. So they have written their proposal to the best of their ability. They give it to us and we review and critique and go back with recommendations as to how that document can be improved to turn it potentially from a loser into a winner. And the thing is, we find the same old errors. As going back to the golden rule, regardless of the client that we're talking to or working with, we find the same old errors, some of which you see represented on the screen here. So we find answers that are incomplete. So they either haven't read the question or they haven't read it properly or whatever. And there might be multiple parts to a question. We're going to have a look at this in a moment, by the way. There might be multiple parts to a question. They've only answered part of them. Now, the person that receives your bid at the other end, at the client end, is called an evaluator. There might be a team of them, there might be one individual, but depending upon the size of the project. That evaluator will read their question, will read through your answer, and if you haven't responded to every part of the question, they'll never be able to give you the best possible score, because they have to score each answer and then the total number of marks come together to form either a winning bid or a losing bid, or perhaps get you on a short list of some description. Another factor that we find, and this goes back to the exercise or the thought process that we did earlier about looking at things from the client perspective. We find many organisations are very wrapped up in their own business, which is understandable, of course, because it's important and you put a lot of time and effort into it, particularly over the last year or so. But we have to reflect in our bid, and we have to discuss in our bid what's important to the client. Everything that we talk about, even if it's about us, has to relate back, or should relate back, to what it is that they want to achieve. Another problem that we find, and this is for the salespeople out there, and by the way, that's all of you. As I said when I made the initial introduction, I'm a salesperson at heart. This is and there should be a selling philosophy, a selling mindset in place when you're bid writing, because it's not admin, it is part of the sales process. The feature is what it does. Let me go back again. The feature is what it is. The benefit is what it does. The feature is something about your business. It's something about your process, your people, your services, your products, your tools, your experience, whatever. It only becomes a benefit when we describe to the client in the bid how their organisation will become better. So the feature is what it is, the benefit is what it does. And when we think of benefits, we think of a kind of typical mantra. We think of increases, improvements, reductions, savings, and gains. So how can your bid improve? How can it increase? How can it reduce positively? How can it make a saving? How can it give them something that they haven't got at the moment? That's value, and those are benefits. We also, I'm being repetitive because these things are important and we must make sure that they sink in. We have to include different types of evidence that cement our story, that give our claims veracity, they give them strength, they make them ultimately more believable. And we will be looking at how we do that next week when we look at the evidence piece. And there are lots of other reasons. There are probably 100 reasons that we could come up with, but these are some key ones that you see on the screen now. So when we are about to write our document, we should be thinking of a plan, first of all. We shouldn't just sort of look at question one and start writing the answer. So we should think about, it's a bit like, an approach. If you interviewed any good author and you said, how do you write a book? They don't tend to just kind of start with the first word on the first page. They have a structure, they have a plot, they have a series of chapters. And the same is true of what makes a great bid. It might seem like a bit of a bind at the beginning, but it will save you time at the end if you have a plan beforehand. So the first question that we have to ask ourselves when we're thinking about our plan is what we call the why question. And I'm going to give you a minute to think about, or not a minute, a few seconds to think about what the why question might be, because there's lots of different why questions that you could ask yourself. The why question, in this case, and it has lots of answers, by the way, there's lots of different parts to the answer, which we're going to explore. But the why question is, why us? Put your company name, replace us with your company name. So if it was me, it's why Bid Perfect. i.e., why should they choose us and not any of the other, 200 companies or whatever it is that can potentially provide this service? Have a think about that. If you don't know, if you can't put the reasons down in black and white, not in detail necessarily, but 3, 4, 5, half dozen reasons down in black and white why they should choose you, then you will never be able to tell your client or your potential client. If you don't know, then they're never going to know, because you won't be able to articulate it to them in the bid document. And that's why it's the most fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves. So think of what the answers might be. Try and populate that space. Come up with 2 or 3 very short things that you would put forward as to why should they choose to work with insert organisation X here. See what you can come up with while I just buy a few seconds of your valuable time. So I'm going to give you a few examples, okay? Which, again, these things typically come up in this kind of scenario. Do you mention flexibility? Maybe. Did you mention your levels of professionalism? Perhaps. Attention to detail? I wrote a list earlier on just to make sure I didn't miss anything out. Experience, expertise. These are all good things, aren't they? These are all things, attributes of an organisation that any evaluator will be looking out for. But the question is, the challenge is, the cat amongst the pigeons is, are they enough? And the answer to that question is not necessarily, not by themselves, because we are claiming to be flexible, we are claiming to be professional, but those claims are probably going to be made by our competition, because everyone in a particular sector, everyone tends at a surface level to say the same things. So in our bid, we must take what is generic language, we're flexible, we're experienced, we have attention to detail, and transfer that generic language into reasons to choose you that are focused on the client, that drive value, that drive benefits out to their organisation, and are supported, as I've already said, with some evidence to make your story and your case more believable. So flexibility, professionalism are good things, absolutely. I'm not being disrespectful in any way by saying that, but we have to kind of make the stance that this generic language is probably going to be claimed by somebody else. So the evaluator has to make a decision on whose flexibility is better. So if we are focused on flexibility that makes them better, and we're supporting our claims with evidence, then they're going to choose you or give you a higher mark rather than your competition. Another golden rule for you, understanding what you're being asked and the objectives, so the broader objectives, are critical to writing a winning answer. There are four ways, primary ways to determine, in fact, they're probably the only ways to determine what a client is looking for. When I say a client, okay, I'm talking about an organisation that you're either doing business with, so they are an existing client, or you're looking to win some work from, which in sales parlance will become a prospect, but we're going to use client as an overarching term, okay? The four ways are as follows. Some perhaps obvious, others maybe less so. They tell you, of course they tell you, you've got a document to respond to. You have what's called an ITT, you have an invitation to tender. In some cases, there'll be a pre-qualification process as well, a pre-qualification questionnaire or an evaluation questionnaire of some description. You might have an RFP, which is the same as an ITT, but it stands for request for proposal. Essentially, as I've said, you've got a document or a series of documents, because there's normally a tender pack that will be issued, that you've got to respond to. So that's option number, no, it's not an option because you've got to look at it. That's way number one, that's method number one. Method number two is we can ask questions. And if we ask questions, then we hopefully, if they're playing the game, we are going to receive answers. Now, can you always ask questions? No. Is it better to ask questions? Yes. Our recommendation is that, and of course, you know, over the last, 14 months now, it's been more difficult to engage with people because of, you know, what's gone on. I don't need to remind you of that. But we should be trying to set up some kind of dialogue with a potential organisation and the respective individuals within that organisation that are going to use our services or are our prospect for using our services at some stage. Then when it comes to the tender itself, we are bidding from a warm perspective, i.e. they know us and we know them, rather than a cold perspective where you're just responding to questions on a page. Because if we haven't made steps to try and develop some form of engagement or dialogue, then our competitor probably has. So they're going to have the advantage rather than ourselves. So try and create that process of dialogue by ask questions and use the answers that you are given as ammunition when the bid comes around. We should be doing our research. And in fact, and again, the reason for that is, yes, we want to know more about the opportunity and the client, but we should be trying to get the edge on our competition. Everywhere is competitive. I mentioned that earlier on. So if our competitor isn't doing their research, and we are, we can get the edge on them. If they are doing their research, and we're doing it as well, at least we're staying level. But all the time, we should be looking to try and get an edge on our competition. And lastly, when the tender process has been launched, there is an opportunity to ask questions formally through what's called the clarification process, the Q&A. The thing to bear in mind there is, certainly in the public sector and in most private sector tendering processes, the questions and answers are all made public. So they won't necessarily tell you to ask the question, but the question will be circulated up by all the respective, to all the respective bidders. And of course, the councils, in this case, answers will be circulated as well. So don't ask questions that you think will give something to your competitor, which you wouldn't want them to have. Don't ask questions that are repetitive, i.e. that somebody else has asked, because frankly, it makes you look unprofessional and a bit silly. But always look through the questions that other people have asked, because in every case, there might be something that you haven't thought of and they have. So again, it's about trying to keep up with people and potentially get an edge on your competition. So those are the 4 ways. They tell you in the invitation to tender. You ask questions in a dialogue process. You do your research. We're going to look at an exercise on that shortly. And you can ask further clarification questions should you need to do so. So there's a kind of a hierarchy, if you like, of understanding what is important to the client and what it is that they are looking to achieve. And the first level, it's not necessarily more important, but it's the broader consideration I mentioned earlier on. What is important to this organisation that we're talking to, hopefully, and we're about to bid to right now? What is going on in their world, so to speak? What are the bigger, sort of more strategic things that they are looking at? Because in doing your research and understanding that, they will be embarking across their organisation on different projects. And a tender is a project, essentially, and those projects are designed to lead to the achievement, of course, of the bigger picture and of the bigger objective. The second thing that we absolutely must understand is, well, what are the absolute needs? What are the things within this tender, or as a result of this tender, when they select an organisation to work with, that we must deliver? Now, in some cases, there'll be a series of must-haves, but there is also a series of what we call the sub-needs. So steps along the way that lead, if you like, to a bigger achievement. So in displaying your professionalism and the way that you thought things through, it's worthwhile having an understanding of that and making note of that in your proposal. And then we have the nice to have all the added value, the things which is typically called added value anyway, the things that maybe they haven't thought about. You are the expert in what it is that you do, or your business is. So you can make recommendations where you see something can be made better over and above, the stipulated requirements in the tender document. Then you should make those recommendations. And that is typically, as I've said, if an organisation hasn't thought of it, then you are adding value over and above the essential requirement, which might make the difference between you and your competition. Go back to the point I made before. So once we've established what's important to them, so what their challenges, their needs, their aspirations, the bigger strategic picture, the absolute requirements of the project, and potentially the added value, we have the foundation of our winning bid. If we don't know what they want, what do we end up writing about? We end up writing about things what we think they might be important. We end up writing a lot about ourselves, some of which will be interesting and some of which probably won't. So to create the best possible bid and the winning bid, we must understand, both at a broad level and at a more specific level, what it is they want to achieve. Now, the specific level is understanding and answering the questions within the bid document. And to put ourselves in the best possible situation, we should conduct something that at Bid Perfect we call question analysis. We should look at how the questions are comprised, how they're made up, and if we understand that, we're in a better position to provide an answer. It makes it easier for us to understand the question, and it makes, when the answer is received at the evaluator's end, it makes it easier for them to understand their answer, because we structure our answer, or we should structure our answer in the same way that they've structured their question, because that makes it easier to score. And I'm going to use an old trite expression now, but it's true. Points make prizes. It's true in bidding, it's true in game shows, and it's true in bidding. again, I mentioned earlier on the things that we typically find are problems with bids, and one of those problems is the missing part of an answer. So if you miss part of the answer because you haven't established really what the requirement is in the question, then they're going to downgrade your score. And if you do that consistently, you're on your way to writing a losing bid. So this is a real question from a real bid. It's a good one to use for this exercise because it's quite generic. You could use this question in pretty much any sector in bidding, regardless if it's for services or products. And my question to you is, well, how many elements are we supposed to be answering here? How many requirements do we need to meet? How many things, if you like, do we need to address within our response? Now, in black and white, or in blue and white in this case, it kind of looks like there are three things, doesn't it? Well, there are 3 paragraphs. Surely that means there are 3 things that I must consider and meet when I provide my response. But if we break it down, we are in a much better position to ensure we don't miss anything. And as I said, if you miss something, you miss it at your peril. So the breakdown, and hopefully I've given you a few, again, seconds to take a look at the example here. The breakdown is not necessarily 3 paragraphs. The breakdown actually looks more like 6 requirements that we need to make sure that we meet or exceed. Again, the requirement is always to meet with the specification of what's being asked. But where we can, we should look to exceed. Again, I make the point of trying to get one over our competition. If they've met with the requirement, but we've exceeded it, then our answer might move from a good answer to an excellent answer and score more points. So I reckon there are half a dozen things here that we need to make sure that we cover. We need to provide a high-level description of the structure of the company. Now, on that point, when they say high level, that means they don't need detail. High level is the operative expression. We could provide a graphic here. We could provide an image. We could provide an organizational chart to at least partially answer that question with some words around it. Then they want to know the structure of the division of the company responsible for delivering the services. Well, we actually could combine that into the point above as well. Number of people in each team, relatively straightforward. Description of the resources. Well, okay, resources are people resources. Yes, I get that. But what other resources might you use to deliver the service? Would you use tools? Would you use plants? Would you use financial resources? These are all considerations. The question is aimed around people, but what we're always trying to do, as I've said, is go above and beyond. So what other resources would be worthwhile mentioning? Other key contracts being delivered in a similar time frame. Well, what do they ask that question? You know, there must be something going on in their mind to ask that part of the question. Is it because they just want an understanding of where else you're doing it and they're looking for a level of comfort in that respect? That would be some evidence there. For example, a case study we could use. Or is there a concern? Perhaps there's a concern that this organisation believes, or whoever the tendering organisation is, in this case, let's say Hounslow Council, is there a concern that they think you're overstretched and you're using your resources, you're burning your resources elsewhere? So there's some explicit requirements that we must ensure we address, and there are some implicit requirements when we read between the lines. And it's important to have an understanding, to sit back and reflect exactly what we're being asked here, and then how we can go about responding to the answer. And then we've got answer part 6 as well, how we manage any conflict with other projects that we're currently delivering. Let's go back to number 3 for a moment. Number of people in each team. You could just tell them the answer. There'll be 1 person in each team. There'll be 3 people in each team. But I go back to, this is a process of selling. So tell them why that number is the correct number. Justify your response. If 3 people in your belief is the correct number, or if 3 people is what you're going to provide, why is 3 people the correct number? So sell your response against your competition. This is an example. I've mentioned this word evaluation and evaluator. This is an example. And again, there is no standard. This is just one that we've created for the purposes of this training. There's no standard evaluation criteria. But when they receive your bid and all those of your competitors, they will read the questions, they will read the answers, they'll look at the supporting documentation, obviously, and they will provide each answer with a score. So if they believe that your answer does not meet the basic question requirements, they'll give it a 0. If they believe that you've defined your solution well, they can see clear benefits, there's strong evidence, there's a quantification for the benefits as well, i.e. if you've spoken about efficiency savings, you've said by how much, and therefore there's clear value, your answer will be given a 5. And there are 4 other options, as you can see here. So that is the process that takes place. They receive your document, they read through, they look at their question, they look at your answer, they'll try and understand if you've covered every element of the answer, as per the previous example, and then they'll look for certain factors about your answer and give it a score. And this is a representative example that we see here. And they'll add up all the scores, and either you're successful or you're not. And also the bid is, I should have mentioned this earlier maybe, but the bid will be weighted typically between your pricing and let's call it your service or your quality. So it might be 50-50, it might be 60-40, and it could be 60-40 in favour of one or the other. But the written answers are evaluated and scored in the way that you see it here, or in a similar fashion with a different, perhaps, form of evaluation criteria. So I mentioned before that it's incumbent upon us as a professional business and as someone that wants to come out of this as a winner rather than a loser, to understand more about our client over and above what they've written in the tender document, which is sometimes very limited. So, you know, what more could be of use to us when we write our bid, when we write our answers, when we go back to them with our proposition. So there are 2 factors that I'd like you to think about there. The first one is, where will we go to do it? We've said, right, we're going to do some research on this organisation. What sources are available for us to do that research? That's item number 1. Item number 2 is, okay, when we've arrived at our research source, whatever that is, what information should we be looking for? What could we use to our advantage, again, in the bid process, to make ourselves more professional, more competent, to show that we have thought about, as I've said, the broader picture, as well as the specific requirements of the tender. So there's a lot that we can do. I'm going to give you a list of options. I'm not suggesting that you do these things in every single bid that you are involved in. It will depend upon the complexity of the bid, it will depend upon the value, it will depend upon how much you want it, if I'm frank with you, and it probably would depend upon how much time you have available. But there are a lot of places we can go, and there's potentially a lot of information that we can look for. So the first one, and probably the most obvious one, and I guess this is number 1 on all of your lists, is the website. So if you were to go to our website, and I've used my own company as an example, as a minor bit of promotion, but if you were to go to BidPerfect's website, this is those very good looking people, or one of them anyway, I'm not saying which one, that you'll be presented with. Okay, so the website's a good place to start, because the website, most organisations, public or private sector, have decent websites these days, and you should be able to glean a lot of information from the website. I'd also think about LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn has primarily 3 different areas. It has the company page, example that you see here, or the organisational page, example that you see here. It has the pages about the individuals themselves, which we'll come to. And it has, in some cases, not in all, but in some cases, group pages. Now, we run a group, and that group is called the Bid Professionals Forum. Feel free to join up if you want to. But so, again, some, perhaps more in the commercial sector, but some of your potential clients might run group pages, so that's worthwhile taking a look at. You could follow them on Twitter, couldn't you? Now, this is an example where most probably of what you will receive as a tweet are, to a certain extent, not that helpful, but it might be just the odd thing that you receive. Okay, I didn't realise that, or okay, I didn't realise I was thinking about that at the moment. I might be able to use that to my advantage. So you could follow them on Twitter. So these are all things that, of course, you know, are kind of done for you. All you have to do is follow them, and the rest of the information is presented for you. You could look at a Facebook page if you wanted to. Not just social media, is it? There are other things that are put on Facebook, YouTube. I think I'm correct in saying that the presentation I'm giving now is going to be available to you on YouTube. The links will be published. So again, that might be another opportunity that you could look at. And there are lots of other places as well. Of course, there's the bid document. I've said that you've got to read that. Not only read it thoroughly, but you've got to read kind of between the lines as well, looking at the example question that we looked at. I noticed there are there's something in the chat here, so just bear with me a second. I want to make sure that I've not missed anything. Don't think I have. Yeah, I think that's just for information purposes only. The slides will be made available and so on. Good. Okay, so yes, the bid document, which might then lead you to do some more analysis and research in different areas. Your internal resources and knowledge. So if you're a company, you're working with others rather than if you're a one-man band. There might be colleagues that know something about this organisation, partners if you're working, or subcontractors if you're working with other organisations as well. You might store knowledge on a database or some form of customer relationship management system. That would be worth interrogating to see what's on there. Have you bid to this organisation before? If you have, what was the bid then? What's it now? Are there differences? What was the feedback? Really important. All public sector bodies it's obligatory for them to give you feedback, win or lose. So always look at the feedback. If you've lost, you need to know the reasons why and what you're going to do about them the next time. If you win, well, carry on in that tradition, I would say. Annual report, we mentioned earlier on about, a council might have a strategic report as well. So we mentioned earlier on about the broad picture objectives. You'll find those broad picture objectives in an annual report or in some kind of strategy review or report. Certainly worthwhile having a look at that. Google search, Glassdoor. Some of you might be familiar with Glassdoor just one example. Glassdoor is, Google it. Glassdoor is an organisation that will give you or will allow employees to give their views on the organisation that they're working for. You will always come across disgruntled people. Avoid those, but look for where there's a pattern of people saying things about a certain factor. Google Alerts, some of you might be familiar with Google Alerts. If you're not, just Google it, okay? If you want to be presented in your email each morning with what's being said in the news and in the media about a certain organisation, you can set up a Google Alert for them. And Google will do it for you rather than you do the searching for yourself. Of course, you can go to any other kind of news organisation as well and publications and that kind of thing. Yeah. Getting out and about, that'd be good, wouldn't it? June the 21st, maybe not, let's see. But yeah, we would recommend, I go back to trying to create some form of engagement or dialogue process, then getting out to exhibitions and conferences and events and seminars and that kind of thing, or even online at the moment, I guess for the next few weeks anyway. If there's appropriate sector federation or governing body, that might be worth looking at, if they're part of that. Of course, when we're talking about the public sector, information, not all of it, but certain information has to be published. Council minutes of meetings, some of it's streamed now, isn't it, online? So that would be worth perhaps looking at as well. Credit reference, not for a council, I know they're going to pay your bill, but in the private sector, if you want to understand the credit worthiness of an organisation, because you do the work and you've done the work well, you want to be paid for it ultimately. So that might be worth looking at. Experian would be an example, and others, of course, are available. Other divisions and subsidiaries of either their organisation or of yours if you're part of a larger group. And competitors' website, not appropriate for a council, but where you're bidding against the commercial sector, it would be worthwhile understanding perhaps how they are trying to differentiate themselves from their competitors. Again, I go back to this broader understanding of them and their organisation. The second part of the equation is, or was, and still is, when you're doing your research, what is it that you're looking for? So we've looked at different places, different sources of information. Well, what do we want to find? What can we use as ammunition in our bid? What's going to make us look more professional, more kind of switched on as an organisation? Well, what's new? What's the kind of current thing at the moment? What are the challenges? What are the current headaches that a business has? Or what do they consider to be important? If it's us, this goes back a while, but we've launched a series of online modules. So I'm doing this now on Zoom, but the same thing is available for you to do in your own time in a module online. So that would be, if you were bidding to us, highly unlikely, but if you were bidding to us, that might be something that we consider you should know about before you come through our door, so to speak, our virtual door anyway. Do we know what they do? I mean, yeah, of course we know what a council does, but different councils provide different services, some of which are outsourced and some of which aren't. In the commercial sector, we should have a better understanding of them and their organisation and what they're delivering. What's driving them? What's motivating them? What's their beliefs and views and values and opinions? That kind of thing. We looked at the LinkedIn example earlier, and I said, of course, it's the organisation, but of course, it's the people. So if you've again maybe set up that dialogue process, that engagement process, or you're about to, and you want to know who you should be talking to, or trying to, then LinkedIn would be a good example to use, or good reference point to use for that. Just Google them if you want. You might find, again, a lot of stuff in there that is not really important, but you might find an odd snippet that you can use to your advantage. And lastly, and we're just about finished, which is good because it's 2:57, the long list, some of which I've already mentioned, to be fair. The strategy, sure, over different periods of time. So what's happening, not necessarily over the next few months, but in 5 years or 3 years' time. What's the kind of, again, that broader picture that I've mentioned to you? What's their vision and values? Again, these are things that are published, so you should be looking for those, because the objective here is to, I go back to a point that I made about cultural fit. They're looking for someone that they feel is aligned culturally. If your vision and values, certainly your values, are aligned with the organisation that you're bidding to, and that comes through in your bid, you're going to be a better cultural fit for them, perhaps, than your competitor. What do they believe in? What are their views? What are their opinions? What do they deem to be important right now? What are the challenges and goals? And what they deem to be important and what they're challenged by and what they're aspiring to could well be the same thing. Opportunities for you to make a difference. So for whatever service you're bidding to provide, how are you helping them to overcome a challenge? How are you helping them to meet a particular goal or aspiration? Again, that's an empathetic way of looking at things. What's happening in the marketplace? What's the change in legislation? What's happening with, I don't know, health and safety, whatever it is. Again, you're the expert. You should know what's coming around the corner. Therefore, potentially, what are the business critical issues? Go back 2 years. I think it was 2 years, if my memory is correct. The big thing there was GDPR. I mean, that's 2 years ago and it's done and dusted now, but everyone was talking about GDPR, how much of a pain it potentially was for their organisation to conform to. What's happening right now? And then, of course, we had the Brexit thing as well. He says just kind of, saying as that was nothing. The language and other opportunities for reflecting. What language do they use? Not, I like Welsh or French or whatever. What's their terminology? What phrases do they use? How do they write their own internal documents? When we talk about reflecting, that means discussing what's good about us, but in a way that the client is able to understand it more easily for themselves, because we're using their language rather than our language. That's one example. Their definition of a good supply. Now, not everyone will tell you this, and it's of course it's at a very generic level. But if you go on a website, you might find a suppliers page, and it might say, okay, when we look to work with an organisation, this is the criteria that we look for. We look for openness, we look for integrity, we look for honesty, we look for attention to detail, whatever it is. And then in your bid, again, at that generic level, maybe not. You might give some specific instances that you are explaining how you meet with that criteria that they have defined, if they have defined one. What are the numbers that you should be aware of? Who's doing what? Who are the kind of movers and shakers and influencers within an organisation? Who said what? Who preferably at a senior level. So, if a chief executive of a council says something and it kind of works, it underlines maybe your proposition or what it is that you think you're going to try and help them achieve, then reflect that back to them in your bid. Again, it's another way to show that you've kind of looked at the bigger picture and you've thought through things. Lastly, maybe not as appropriate for a public sector body, but what are the personal motivations? When I say personal motivations, I'm talking about the people that you hopefully may or about to try and engage with. what's important to them as well as the organisation that they represent. Again, probably more commercial sector than public sector, but it's, again, another factor where we might be able to get an edge on our competition. I was 1 minute late, it's 1 minute past 3. That is the end of Bidding to Win. I remind you that the information that I've just given you will be available, I think, on YouTube. We'll make that clear, don't worry. And we will continue this process of how to write a winning bid at the same time, same place, next week for another hour. For now, I'm not sure, but I think I'm handing you back to Nawzar. Nawzar, are you there?
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. Excellent. Any comments, anything you want to put on chat? Anybody wants to do so? We are here for a few minutes more. We can do that now. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned as well. I learned from attending Neal's sessions every time. It helps us as well because we bid for new business, and every time, hopefully, I pick up something new, something a bit different as well. Okay, so if there's no further questions, just to clarify, as Lisa has just pointed out and put in the chat file, all our programs are available. All the recordings are actually available on the YouTube site. If you don't have the link, if you simply type in Hounslow Chamber YouTube, it will actually come up with all the programs now and in the past. So there it is. Thank you, Lisa. The other point is, as I said earlier, we will send you a copy of the slides after Neal's second one. So just an incentive. Please attend his session next week. It is as good or better than this one, and you will go away with many gems, many ways to help you to win more business. So on that happy note, I'm going to say many thanks again.
Now,
do we have to? We have a question here, Neal. Do we have to register for the next session? Yes, please. I'll share the same link. We will. I don't have access to it. It's the Hounslow Chamber Zoom. So if you follow that link, which Lisa has just put up, we will be sending you a joining link for the second one as well. So expect an email from me tomorrow to everybody who registered. But if you click on that link now, which Lisa has just put up, you'll be able to register. Any last famous words, Neal?
Yeah, the one last thing. There is a small written exercise next week. Nawzar has sent out the exercise instructions in advance. You don't have to do it, of course, but if you want to kind of join in with the fun, you can do that, because part of what we're going to look at next week is how to write as much as we can in the hour that we have, how to write in a clear, precise way. So if you want to do the exercise beforehand, that's fine. If not, we'll look at the results next week anyway. Okay.
Many thanks, everybody. See you same time.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Next week. And thank you, Lisa, for hosting, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Neal. Just for now. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye.